I still had to do the work. Ended up being cashier of the year a couple of times, so I could still do the work. But if they weren't sensitive that there was something wrong with the way they had been recruiting people or employing people, if they weren't cognizant of how that inequality had been built in, they would have never sought particularly to attract people of color into their organization. But because they recognized the cause of the inequality, they sought a way to address it. And because I was fortunate enough to be able to help them address that, then it was fine. Then I'm understanding what the big picture is.
Were they? We had an interview recently with Ron Jimerson, who talked about providing some job opportunities to homeless people locally, and he had tried with an organization, I think 3 times. The first time, the homeless people all took the jobs, and I think within 2 weeks they'd all dropped out. And he tried it again later. And what happened ultimately? They've developed a successful program, but what was going on was the easy, obvious first step was let's offer jobs to these people.
Right.
But what they weren't yet considering was what sorts of accommodations the people would need to help them make the transition so that they could be successful. And so they got better and better at accommodating those needs. And what impressed me in hearing that interview was how willing the company was to keep plugging away at making this work. How do you, that's where the things get difficult in terms of all fields. Again, racial inequities, gender inequities, disability inequities. How much do you give? How much accommodation? I mean, to go back to what you said about people feeling that something's being taken away from them.
And again, that goes back to asking the question, what is our desired outcome? Now, you have to build some agreement, and if you have a strong leader who's talking about this is the outcome that we want, and I think with Jimerson's example, it was the leader of the head of the organization that this is what we want to do, and so we'll have to do the hard. We'll have to do the hard things in order to make that happen, and change is not always easy. And what I appreciate about the work that they've done at Cascade Engineering is that they have looked at people, they've tried, and they've given them some extra help. So it wasn't, okay, here's a job application, and now
you've got an equal opportunity.
You've got an equal opportunity. They've noticed that perhaps they'll need some extra training and just even a different understanding of how to work and how you do that work in order to help them. And I think that's one way of addressing it, because we do have to address individual shortcomings. And that's something that a organization can do, a private business can do. Then another step would be, then what would our society or what would our community, I mean, what would it look like if our community said, we want to get rid of homelessness? So would that mean we'd need to build houses that people could actually afford? Does that mean we might have to lower the mortgage rate, or say, or give have lower payments, different percentage, or maybe no interest at all, maybe a no interest loan? So
that that's not fair to those of us who are paying interest.
I know, who could get them in. You know, And I think if we are understanding what is the outcome, and if we could build an understanding that it's not taking away from you, but it's a part of building community, we'd have better buy-in.
I do. To back up to that, Habitat does the sweat equity thing. You might not have money to put in, so you're going to put in some time, some hours, and you're going to help out with some other homes as well to earn your own. And that seems to be a sort of equitable thing of let's look at what each individual has to contribute to the project, and it might not always be money, or it might not always be education or whatever.
And also, I think we need to think about what privilege do we have, and we don't like to think of ourselves as having more privilege, or we always talk about the underprivileged. We never talk about the overprivileged.
We deserve our privilege.
I'm the overprivileged. I worked hard for this. I'm not overprivileged. I just paid my dues. But this a little while ago, some months ago, I was in South Africa, and in South Africa I was with a group, and we were buying some jewelry from individuals. And when we got back, there were some people in our group who were bragging about how much they had bartered down, you know, way down. And I lost it in that conversation. I said, how can you be proud of bartering down, getting a low, really low price.
You could have easily paid
when you
full
could have
price.
easily paid, and that this group of people, that they're depending on tourist dollars to survive. I said, you know what? I know I overpaid. I know that I paid more than what someone who might have been local or someone else, and I'm happy to have done it because in some ways I'm feeling I'm contributing to their livelihood, and I want them to feel better. They may feel they've gotten over on me, and that's fine.
To feel that you've helped someone and gotten some profit from it.
And for me, that was a way of restitution, reconciliation, justice, my own little bit to play in this part of social justice. Here we are in the United States, and we have all of this immense resources and power. And here's some of my brothers and sisters in South Africa that do not have that access or benefit, and some of the things that we do have a negative impact on them. So this was my small way. So yes, let me pay the first price that you offer instead of trying to barter you all the way down to something that's...
What's hardest for you about trying to promote this idea of equity? You've gotten some resistance. I've gotten some resistance,
and one of the hardest things about promoting this is getting people comfortable with the idea that we can notice difference and that we actually like inequality, because if you can recognize one that...
And you're saying that's okay, right?
I'm saying that's okay. I'm saying that's okay. And when I look at creation, inequality is all over the place.
Ultimately, equity is about making sure everyone has enough, everyone has what they need.
Ultimately, that's what equity is about. Everyone has what they need. And that's what true community is all about, is everyone has what they need. We have to ask ourselves, having a winter house and a summer house is fun, but
do you need them both?
But do you need both, especially when you know someone just down the street has no house?
Either.
Then we need to relook at what do we mean by community. And if the community that we want, the community that I want, everybody has what they need. I just gave away my coat, a long wool coat, because there was someone that I was having a conversation with, and they didn't have a coat. And I said, okay, I've got 4 or 5 coats at home. How can I go back home and look in my closet and store see these 4 or 5 coats, put it up, oh, well, it's not Sunday, so I'm not going to wear it today. And I know that winter is coming and you don't have a coat. Here, take my coat. Yes, it is nice. Yes, it is nice. I do like it, but I want you to have it because I can't look at myself in the mirror knowing that you don't have a coat and I have more coats than I need.
I think equity would give us 45 minutes for this show instead of half an hour, but we'll call it a day. Thank you so much, Michelle. My guest today has been Michelle Loyd-Paige, Dean of Multicultural Affairs at Calvin College in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I'm Karen Saupe. Thank you for watching Inner Compass.
All right. We want to focus on our subject for today, which is talking about gospel music and the Word of God, equity for all. It's easy to judge others. We want to thank the gospel group, the original gospel creators out of Atlanta, Georgia. Blessed by the Best. We will open up with their songs, One Day. And you can get this CD by calling Sharper Brothers Incorporated, National Booking 404-451-4265, or book Terran Foster at the original gospel creators at gmail.com. Love, peace, and happiness. This is a great CD, the best of the best. 10 cuts on that CD. We hope you enjoyed it as opener. We're going to be playing more of it as we continue here with Howcee Gospel Blog Talk Radio. We're going to go to a broadcast Martin Luther King did, and I believe in 1961, regarding equity, Dr. King, race relations, and the human side of equity and equality before we get into our broadcast. So stay with us here as we continue here on Howcee Productions Gospel Blog Talk Radio. We hope everything is going well for you and that you are pleased with what we are doing here today. And we'll be back and continue in them.
Unexpected thing about you, to me, is that for a long time you've been a national leader of your people. You're one of the most influential figures, I suppose, in the United States, and yet you're only 32 years old. Now, did you have any special training for this kind of leadership when you were a boy?
No, I really didn't. I had no idea that I would be catapulted into a position of leadership in the civil rights struggle in the United States. I went through the discipline of early elementary school education and then high school and college and theological training, but never did I realize that I would be in a situation where I would be a leader in what is now known as the civil rights struggle of the United States.
Is your father, who's also a Baptist pastor, as I know, is he a social reformer as well as a minister, or is he less interested in this side of it?
Well, he's quite interested, actually. He has had an actual interest in civil rights across the years. He is a pastor of a large church in Atlanta, Georgia. Incidentally, I'm co-pastor of the church. And he has had a strong interest in civil rights. He has been president of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in Atlanta. And he always stood out in social reform.
Do you think he saw that you would be a leader? And do you think he did, in fact, bring you up in some special way to face these responsibilities?
Well, I think he certainly realized the need for this. And after I decided to enter the ministry, he constantly stressed the need for leadership. And I'm sure that he hoped that I would stand out in this area. Whether he realized that I would do it or not is something else, but he certainly hoped for this.
What sort of home did you have as a child? Was it a strict home, for instance?
Well, I guess it was a relatively strict coming up in a minister's home. I faced the discipline that you would face in the very fervent religious background. However, I don't think it was over strict to the point that I developed any personality conflicts as a result of my early childhood, but it was strict enough, and I think it was strict enough for me to develop certain disciplinary principles as I came up.
Were you a quick starter at your lessons?
Yes, I would say generally I was. Interestingly enough, I didn't start out with an interest to enter the ministry. At first, after finishing high school, I was interested in going into law and also medicine at one point. And all along, I received fairly good grades. But finally, I decided to enter the ministry and then went on to theological school.
Well, now, when you were still a small boy, before those decisions came along, were you conscious of color discrimination in your own life?
Yes, I became conscious of color discrimination at a relatively early age. I think the first time was when I was about 6 years old. I had some friends who lived, well, they didn't live in front of us, but their parents had a store, 2 white boys, and they were my inseparable playmates for the early years of my life. And I remember when I was about 6, something started happening. When I went over to play with them, they always made excuses. They could not play. They were busy. And finally, I went to my mother with this problem, and she tried to explain to me in the best way she could explain to a child 6 years old. And this was really the first time that I became aware of the racial differences, or rather the racial problem. She made it clear to me that this system had a long history, dating back to the time of slavery. She tried to explain the meaning of the system of segregation. But the thing I would always remember is that